The United Kingdom general elections are upon us,
Oh shit, here we go again.
and I was requested to share my opinion on the matter. And because I've been regularly ill in the last couple of months, I'm just too tired to be pleasant. So,
That is not a good idea.
first of all, I think there's no denying that Labour and Keirstarmer are actually in a good place to win the general elections. However, people who are voting for Labour just because they are not the Conservatives are a bunch of idiots. Because by now, people should have known that Labour and the Conservatives are two sides of the same coin. Both parties are World Economic Forum and BlackRock's bootlickers. The Conservatives say conservative things, but let's be honest, their actions have said otherwise. The woke cult has flourished under the Conservatives, and they have done nothing to prevent the far-left indoctrination of children within our school systems. They have continued to allow the de-Christification of Britain, as well as allow extremist Islamist attitudes to flourish. During the pandemic, they did all they can to brown-nose not only the World Economic Forum, but the World Health Organization and the UN. You know, the same people that say that men can get pregnant. Of course, let's not forget about Brexit. The Conservatives have done all they can to sabotage Brexit because really they didn't want it to happen. It was a choice made by the people through the referendum. And the fact that David Cameron returned as the Foreign Secretary should tell you all you need to know. And by the way, this little act by Keir Starmer that he's somehow a bit moderate now, I'm not buying it. First of all, for the good part of the last decade, we've seen the Labour Party taken over by far leftist extremists. One watch of a Labour conference and we can see what weirdos we're dealing with. And the fact of the matter is, even if Starmer tries to be moderate, he does not have the backbone to stand against wokeism within his party. And a great example of this is the recent Diane Abbott fiasco. Let's be honest, Diane Abbott is way past her prime, and right now her only relevancy is as a mascot for the terrorist organization known as Black Lives Matter. Now, due to some rather ignorant comments that she made about the Jews and the increased amount of discrimination against them due to the recent Israel-Palestine conflict, there was a question about whether or not she'd be able to run in the upcoming election. And like clockwork, all the far-left news rags out there and members of the Labour Party itself started to cry racism. And Starmer, like the coward he is, caved in. On a related note, whenever Diane Abbott is criticized, Labour and all the other left-wingers come out and shout racism. Meanwhile, none of them bat an eye if the ethnic minority in question just happens to be conservative. I mean, far be it that the left wing lose their monopoly on racism. Now, I don't know if you have guessed from my voice already, but it's pretty obvious that I'm not Caucasian.
Really? Really? Nah, bro, you lying. Really? You don't say.
In fact, without getting too much into it, I'm actually of Indian Punjabi descent. And in the last month alone, in the very liberal city that I live in, I've been referred to as rishisunak about 4 times by random kids. And unfortunately, due to the liberal society we live in, I could not whoop their ass. Now, speaking of Labour and their followers have somehow managed to rewrite history like the little neo-Marxist pigs they are. A number of problems that started during Labour's tenure have been projected on to the Conservatives and have somehow become wholly their fault. For example, the national debt that has been increasing since the Labour government. And if looked at closely, Conservatives actually managed to slow down the increase in debt compared to what it was projected to be by this year. By the way, if you have time, please check out fullfact.org. It's a website that I've recently come across, and I'm happy to say from what I have seen so far, it seems that they're quite objective and really give the truth about many of the claims being made during this election period. I just hope that, like many other fact checkers out there, they don't become turncoats and one day just become far leftist ideologues themselves. Now, before moving on from the subject of national debt, I do have to say one thing. I don't fully blame one government, whether Labour or Conservative, of a lot of the financial issues that we might have as a country, because most of the financial issues, in my opinion, are dependent on what happens outside of the United Kingdom. In addition to that, from what I have observed, the United Kingdom doesn't really have an industry to speak of. I can't think of many factories we have here. I can't think of many things that we export compared to somewhere like China or India. So we don't really have something here, in my observation at least, and in my opinion, that can really increase our growth from an industrial standpoint and help tackle the debt. Another thing that I keep hearing about is how Conservatives are somehow single-handedly responsible for the downfall of the NHS. As a South Asian Christian, I have many friends and family that actually work in the health sector. And one of the things they have always complained about, and I mean always, including during Labour's tenure, is the NHS's ever-increasing focus on the admin side of things and less focus on the actual healthcare deliverance side of things. If you think that somehow having the Labour government would have slowed down waiting times, you are completely and utterly wrong. These things have been going on since the Labour government, but of course the pandemic made it 10 times worse. Like every true socialist of the modern day, the so-called socialist organization, that is the NHS, takes no personal responsibility. Speaking of the ever hypocritical socialists, isn't it interesting that even though socialists complain about the privatization of parts of the NHS, the one thing they never mention is that the person at the forefront of that, Richard Branson, is pretty chummy with socialists' favorite Barack Hussein Obama. In fact, he's so chummy that after Obama retired from his presidency, he actually went and spent a good time at Richard Branson's private island. I will believe that the socialists actually care and are concerned about the privatization of the NHS only when I actually see them call out these corrupt politicians. Till then, it is nothing more than virtue signaling. This projection of issues that have existed for quite some time not only exists in terms of the big issues out there, but actually has extended itself to little, very trivial issues as well. For example, here is a post that I saw on the Labour UK TikTok. And apparently it's solely the Conservatives' fault that potholes don't get repaired in time. Now, I don't know about you, but the local councils taking their sweet time fixing potholes has always been an issue regardless of what government there is. Another issue I see being raised is the issue of drafting people into the army. Now guys, ask yourself this question. Out of all the people who are fighting in the upcoming election, is there anybody who you think will actually scare Vladimir Putin from attacking Ukraine? I sincerely doubt it. So no matter who is in government, there's a good chance that there will be a draft. I do, however, as I mentioned in a previous video, like the idea of the national service. But that is of course different from a draft. And then there are the Liberal Democrats. The Lib Dems and the Labour are consistently competing with each other to see who can virtue signal the most. Now, unfortunately, I live in an area which is a Lib Dem stronghold, and I'm surrounded by idiots who will continue to vote for the Lib Dems. And no one seems concerned that our local representative, who I will refer to as Knobhouse, is more concerned about climate change virtue signaling than actual local issues. And in fact, even though most of the local people complain about restrictions to movement that have been put in place by Knobhouse in the name of climate change, they will still, as the sheeps they are, go and vote for the Lib Dems. She also, by the way, replaced many of the St. George flags that were above government buildings with pride flags, just showing where her allegiances actually lie. I also looked through the National Manifesto of the Lib Dems, and I have to say, they seem to think money grows on trees. Now, speaking of climate scams, the Conservatives are promising that they will remove ULEZ, which is quite interesting because if they had the willingness to do that, why haven't they done that yet? Speaking of far-left, virtue-signaling politicians, the Green Party is not worth the oxygen to talk about, because at this point, they are just terrorist sympathizers. And now for the part that most of you have been dying to hear about, the Reform Party. Now I know a lot of you probably already know what I am going to say, and some of you are probably already ready to put those angry comments in the comments below, but right off the bat, I do agree with a lot of policies suggested by the Reform Party. And first of all, I was very surprised to see that the Reform Party's representative's flyer actually mentioned local issues, and especially issues that I have raised time and time again. One of these issues is the increasing restriction of movement for the local populace as liberal politicians continue on their campaign to build 15-minute cities, or should I say prison states. Not only that, let's be honest, a lot of these climate change programs have been money-making scams. I mean, why should I have to pay rent to park just outside my house, which I have done for the last 2 decades? The local representative also mentioned how local entrepreneurs and businesses have effectively been driven out of the city center, and only the most rich can afford to build and run businesses there. That said, the flyer also mentioned that the Reform representative has always been an anti-apartheid campaigner, which makes me wonder if she's just another Israel-hating liberal. And then, of course, we have the one and only Nigelfarage. Now, first of all, I would say I have tremendous respect for Farage because he was the only politician that I've ever heard openly talk about how Christians are discriminated in majority Muslim countries, and how it is so unfair that still, even from those countries, most of the refugees that come over aren't Christians or of minority religions, but are Muslim. Also, on the topic of refugees, we of course have the migrants on the boat crisis, and Farage is the only person that I've seen that actually goes to the coastline on boats and reports from there, showing live that the boats are coming in, unlike all the other politicians that are running for office. Now, the thing that I do have to say about Nigel Farage is that I've never really imagined him as a prime minister. Yet at the same time I wonder, maybe it's about time I vote for somebody who doesn't actually look stately. You know, maybe it's time for a change and see how it goes. I mean, it can't be any worse than what we get all the time, right? And in case you're wondering who I have usually voted for, I myself have usually voted for Lib Dems. That is, of course, before they became far left crazies. Now, speaking of crazies, I know a lot of you have probably had a good laugh of how people throw milkshakes at Nigel Farage, but for me, that sort of has had a opposite effect, because when I see something like that, I realize that reform's opposition is sort of juvenile. Would I really trust the future of this country in their hands? That they think throwing milkshakes at somebody is getting a one-up somehow? Maybe I need to vote for who looks like the adult in that situation, and that certainly isn't reform's opposition. Now, speaking of juvenile opposition, I've noticed that a lot of left-wing politicians have started to push for reducing the voting age to 16. Now, in my evangelical work, I get to meet with a lot of teenagers of different walks of life, and I have one observation to share. Teenagers are stupid. In fact, I've started to think 18 is too young to vote. It is that bad out there. Anybody who suggests that we need to reduce the voting age does so because they know they can very easily manipulate that age group. And if there's anything we've seen in the last decade or so, is that how easy it is to manipulate teenagers through social media, in addition to how the teenagers are being manipulated through the education system to become left-wing activists. Now, another issue with reform is I'm not sure how much sway they actually have, nationally speaking. Can they realistically win the election? I'm not sure. But one thing's for sure, I think they're pretty much replacing the Conservatives as the conservative opposition to all the liberal political parties out there. Now, a friend of mine did say that there's a good chance that Labour is going to win, and once they win, they're going to make things so worse for everybody that people will actually start voting for reform. It's a nice thought, and I think that might have some credence to us. After all, Labour has been taken over by all these neo-Marxists who actually want to see the destruction of Britain so they can sort of remake it in their own image. So we'll see how that goes. I do have to say though, Reform is the only party that says that there are two genders, and they say it quite openly. For me, that's a big plus point. Now, additionally, I know that there's some mainstream outlets out there, such as Channel 4, who are trying desperately to paint the Reform Party as, the racist party. But if you actually go check out the recent videos on Channel 4's YouTube page, you're going to realize from the comments that it's actually caused a lot of people to turn to Reform as opposed to away from it. So that's quite a turning of the tables, as they say. Now, before I go, I'm going to do something that I've pretty much never done on this channel. I'm going to say a quick prayer. And I pray to God that He gives us the wisdom and the knowledge and a spirit that helps us fight against the forces of evil, using the democratic powers that God has blessed us with. And I hope that we make the right decision, and a decision that's from Him. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Now, if you guys notice, I've been working quite hard at improving the quality here on Cerebral Gaming as I have taken over the channel. And unfortunately, even to make 60-second shorts, it often takes me 3 to 4 hours to do that, which is very time consuming. So I would appreciate if you hit that subscribe button. And of course, if you can, please support me on buymeacoffee.com/Cerebral. And once again, for all the haters out there, your boos mean nothing to me. I've seen what makes you cheer. And